Welcome to Growing E-Commerce. I'm your host, Mike Ryan of Smarter E-Commerce, also known as SMIC. Today, I'm joined by Collin Slattery, founder of Taikun Digital, and we talk all things mid-funnel. We discuss what's going on with Google's new demand gen campaigns, what to think about YouTube Shorts, and how Meta often compares favorably to Google these days. Collin also shares his take on Google automation, whether it's a net positive or net negative. All right, let's get into it. Cool. So, Collin, thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Before we get into it, I just want to ask you or tell us, where are you joining us from today?
I'm in sunny and very, very hot Barcelona, Spain.
Yeah, cool. So I'm always glad when someone from like the PPC chat crowd or people I know from Twitter are visiting Europe because it's cool, easier to stay in touch with them and stuff like that. What brings you to Barcelona, by the way?
So I love Barcelona. I usually do an international trip every year, like an extended stay. So sometimes that's in Europe, sometimes that's in South America. Last year I was in Istanbul for 2 months and love Spain, love Barcelona, and my girlfriend was able to come on this trip too, and she loves Barcelona. So we said, why not? It's a beautiful city and much more affordable than New York. So felt like a good spot to go. And I speak a tiny little bit of Spanish, which can help. But yeah, no, just my international trip.
Yeah, well, that's really cool. Yeah, I was in Barcelona for like a long weekend once, but it was right before the pandemic happened, and yeah, I don't know. We were kind of using it as a we're preparing to travel with our young son to the U.S., so that was like sort of a practice trip, and then the
Mm,
lockdowns happened. So anyway, but yeah, let's get into it, Colin. So could you get us started with a quick introduction? What are your skills? What themes interest you?
yeah. So I'm Colin. I run Taikun Digital, and like my skills are pretty broad because I taught all of this myself. So, core definitely a Google and Facebook ads kind of guy skewing towards the data and analytics. I used to be like a poker player. I'm a super nerd. So the math and analytics definitely appeals to me. But I've done a little bit of everything from the digital side. So I can update a CSS file too, in addition to, launching Google ads and Facebook ads and things like that.
Yeah, yeah, cool. I think the data side definitely speaks to me as well. It's something that's so interesting about this space, and yeah, then you've also self-taught like entrepreneurship as well. There's a lot of, I guess, in running your own agency, there's a lot that you've got to learn and master there.
Yeah. Or try to master, I suppose.
Try to master. Good qualifier. Yeah, I wanted to ask you about your kind of like your origin story then. Like, I mean, agencies these days, they're just flush with college grads. That's same by us. We recruit straight out of uni a lot, but that's not your background. Could you?
No.
And I don't really know that. I know that there's a story, but I don't know the story. So could you fill us in on your earlier life and how you got here?
I mean, where do we want to start and how much time do we have? I guess is the question. I was fully independent by 18, so I didn't get the luxury of going to college. And New York's an expensive city, so it's an expensive city to be an independent high school graduate at 18. So yeah, I mean, the internet really provided a opportunity to make money and try to make money without any sort of degree, right? This was back in 2007, very new, right? I don't know if you remember the days where like you could do affiliate pharmacies online, like, and Google was okay with that back in like 2006, 2007. So it was really a wild west where like
Yeah,
you could just like do almost anything and there was no
totally
school
unregulated. Yeah.
completely unregulated. I mean, a 17-year-old running an affiliate pharmacy for some sketchy Canadian pharmacy, like that was okay then. So yeah, I mean, I just kind of had to hustle into it, and digital was this wide open space, and so I ended up doing a lot of different stuff over the years. I started the company as like a web host in December 2009. The company was like formalized in August 2010. But yeah, like web hosting, SEO, email marketing, kind of just learning it all because not having a college degree and the Great Recession, which was not great for incomes, really kind of had to hustle. If you've seen the movie Rounders, I played underground poker in New York. That's a whole nother long story, but yeah, it was a little bit of everything, and just scrapping away to make it work, and then eventually you get a little traction, and now I'm in Barcelona.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a cool story. I mean, yeah, Great Recession hit me. So I flamed out of like a PhD program and right in like 2009, and I had no plan B. And then yeah, I mean, I was scraping together. I was working like evening shifts, cashiering at a liquor store. In the morning, I was unloading trucks and driving a forklift, and so that was, it was a wild time anyway. But I don't think that I faced the adversity that you faced as a, very young independent guy in New York City. That's a totally different experience than what I had.
I mean, you understand the scrappiness though. You had to do it yourself. So
It was an adjustment, but that's what got me into retail, which got me into e-commerce, which brought me here. It all, yeah,
it's funny how you can see the dots connected looking backwards, where at the time you're like, this isn't gonna go anywhere, and then in hindsight it does.
yeah. I don't know. It's like yeah, it's like a plinko board, where you're just dropping that ball or that chip down. It's bouncing around, but afterwards you see the path that it traveled.
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, and so I mean, I'm wondering if that, like, if you think that background kind of shapes your view today differently than others. I mean, I think it must somehow.
Yeah, I think so. I think one of the big things is definitely persistence, and especially trying to grow a company. Like there's gonna be bad times, right? And we haven't seen a recession in a long time, at least in the US, but like it's gonna happen. And there are bad quarters, there are bad years. Like you don't just pack up and stop, or even with campaigns and things like that, you're like always trying to find a way to make things work, like persistently trying to improve, and then not really giving up. My superpower is stubbornness and an unwillingness to stop, and that can definitely come in handy because you know, building something is not it's not easy. It's not friendly. It's definitely a full contact sport. You're gonna get knocked on your ass, and just gotta keep keep marching.
Mm.
So it helps to have learned that early.
Yeah, I mean, well, I think that must give you kind of a lot of empathy and firsthand experience when you're working with smaller businesses, because you are like, tell me about who you're working with. I understand it's more on the SMB side, and I have a follow-on question to that. But tell me about who you're working with.
Yeah, so most of our clients are spending less than 100,000 a month. A lot of them are spending less than, done a lot of work with like fresh upstart, like, hey, we launched our Shopify website, like let's get going. And I definitely appreciate the the sort of fortitude and the courage that it takes to be like, I'm going to build something, I'm going to start something, I'm going to put my stuff out there for the market to judge, right? Yeah, I mean, I always like immensely respect all the people who are willing to do that, because it's scary, it's hard, it's humbling, right? Like, what if people don't buy my product? What if people don't like my product? There's always, anyone can talk themselves out of starting something or launching something. And so, you know, always tons of credit to people who are actually in the arena, right? And
Yeah, yeah, totally. I mean, I think, you'll see kind of a darling brand that ends up suddenly it's a sort of emperor has no clothes situation, or a brand collapses or has to shut down, wind down.
Sure.
And there are sometimes people savoring that. And I think it doesn't have a lot of respect for, you know, what the reality on the ground and how hard that is.
Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, well, it's funny because yeah, like 50K, 100K monthly spend is not that small here in Europe, but it's a much more fragmented market. So I think that's a reflection of that. But I want to ask you, like, when you're talking about some of the companies on the smaller side, imagine like kind of a startup brand or something like that.
Sure.
Has paid search become a rich man's sport? Like, do you just have to have the wallet and have to spend big, or what are the challenges faced by smaller advertisers that a larger advertiser wouldn't have to worry about?
There's so many. So I do think it is more of a rich man's sport today than it used to be. Obviously, costs go up as it becomes more mature, right? It's a fully mature platform at this point. But one of the things that we always used to do was like start narrow and expand out on Google, right? You could do like a couple keywords, exact match, where you're like really dialed into exactly who your customer is, get those working, and then start to expand out. And that is really a much less effective strategy these days, especially with all of the machine learning that you have to lean on. The days of manual CBC with maybe that eCBC checkbox clicked are long since over for the most part. And there's a lot of data loss now too, which is a challenge for small advertisers. I've ranted about the search query report many times, but you've got 80% of your spend hidden. You don't even know what's working and what's not because it's all hidden, right? And that's a real concern. I think when you're just starting out, you're trying to figure out what works and you have no idea. If you're big, like, is it really that necessary for you to see all of your conversions? No, because you're getting thousands of them, tens of thousands of them, right? But when you're like, okay, my first few conversions, I got 5 conversions so far in the last couple weeks, and all 5 of them are hidden. You're like, well, what do I take from this, right? What can I learn? What can I apply?
Yeah,
So it's definitely a more challenging environment.
yeah, yeah, totally. I really appreciate that. Like, this idea of kind of using a niche strategy is less feasible than it used to be, and because you're it's harder to get that level of dialed in control that you used to be able to get. And even it just reminds me of a story like at a client. I mean, you can still do like a nowadays considered old school query funneling type build in Google Shopping, where you're just, for those not as deep into it, it's just a way of helping control what kind of search queries you're actually going to be visible for, more generic ones or more product specific ones, etc. And we had advertisers who were using that to specifically avoid or reduce their overlap with Amazon and get into other kinds of auctions. And you don't necessarily have that level of control anymore. It's definitely, I feel like ads used to be a place that allowed anybody to stand shoulder to shoulder or at eye level with a big player, and now it does feel like it's a force that's allowing the big to get bigger and just keep concentrating demand. It's definitely a different kind of feeling than it was a few years back.
Yeah. I used to think and say, right, like you could start with a couple $1,000s a month and like expand out from that, right? Because like you could go really narrow, you could find stuff that's working, you could be getting dollars coming in and start to expand out from that. And now I generally I'm like, look, you have it going. There's going to be so much signal loss. It doesn't work the way it did, and it's at $10,000 a month is a lot. Like
Mm,
that's not pocket change for someone who's starting a new brand or something.
yeah, for sure. So when we look at like this trend toward automation that you've mentioned, like with these newer campaign types, do you think that overall, big picture, like is it serving advertisers better in net terms, considering the we talked about some trade-offs, loss of transparency, a loss of control, but they're offering to kind of offload manual work for us, do things that humans, like a level of computation or tasks that humans wouldn't be able to achieve manually. I mean, where do you stand on this in net terms?
Is it a net benefit? No, I think it's overall a net negative. And this is a pretty strongly held belief of mine. And it makes sense from Google's standpoint, right? Because you have to think Google is a publicly traded company. They're there to make money, right? Their goal is to maximize the amount of money that we're spending on their ads. And the push towards automation, in my view, from things like Performance Max and all of this automation is to for advertising performance, right? Because if you think about it, like historically, the top 1% of advertisers in terms of like skill are making tons and tons and tons of money, and then a huge percentage are just losing money. And that profit that those like hyper elite advertisers are making is viewed as a problem by Google, right? They want to distribute that down and flatten the curve, ideally to the point where I have this term, minimal acceptable return, right? Where every advertiser is essentially getting this minimal acceptable return to keep them advertising, so they keep spending money on Google. So I think, it's probably good for the bottom half of advertisers, but I think it's definitely worse for the top half of advertisers and certainly the people who are being managed by people like ourselves, right? It's not necessarily helpful for them in particular.
Mhm. Yeah, I hear you. I think that there's definitely been, yeah, this word, I'm sorry, there's been like sort of a democratization or something like that, which it feels a little buzzwordy. It also has this inherently kind of positive connotation because we think, oh yeah, democratize, that's great. But to your point, it's kind of like grading on a curve, or this idea of like cutting the tall poppies or something like that. And I don't know. I mean, it's hard for me to. It's tricky because I feel like the from a value proposition standpoint, the people who would be who should benefit most from this would be small and medium businesses. They're under resourced and they don't have necessarily that knowledge level, the skill that you mentioned. We're talking about how it's becoming a more expensive channel. But I think that the reality is it doesn't necessarily serve them that much better because you need a lot of data to make the stuff work. And and in the end, the people with the most data benefit, and they already more likely had access to skilled in-house people or a high quality agency or whatever the case might be. I don't know where exactly I land on that because I think if we think in net terms and it's lifting up this bottom 50%, then in net terms maybe that's good. Hard for me to say, but I definitely that's kind of premise of like Frederick Villet's book, Leveling the Playing Field, because it's definitely it's leveling the playing field. That's the perfect way to phrase it. And I guess the thing is that this is not like if we're all having these self-driving cars or something, that's great. But Google forgets that this is not a commute to work or something like that. This is a competitive race. We don't want to all drive the same self-driving cars as everyone else. We want to win a race.
Right.
And the question is like, how do you differentiate? How do you outcompete in that kind of a scenario? And it's more challenging than it was.
Yeah, absolutely. Because again, like we're all using the same bidding algorithms, like we're losing the targeting, right? So Google's the on-platform differentiation is kind of going away, right? And it's who can get the most data and who's the most optimized like off-channel on website and the retention and the rest of it. So I think they're Google's doing what they can to maximize their profit margins as they should, right? Publicly traded company. That's what they exist for, to
Yeah.
make money for their shareholders.
Yeah. I mean, that's not like bad behavior on their part. That's just, I mean, that's their job actually. So yeah, I get it totally. But
Yeah, this is capitalism, right?
yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think the complaints come when a company is of a certain size and a certain kind of market position and influence where, yeah, I mean, then you can start to be concerned about that. But
I, I I think there's a big difference between Google and Facebook too. And this is something that I don't know, I've thought a lot about, and I feel like not a lot of other people have really like discussed. And I think I find the relationship with Google to be much more adversarial than with Facebook. And I think the reason behind that is from a search standpoint, which is Google's bread and butter, right? Like they really don't have control over the amount of inventory that exists. Like there's like people are going to search basically the amount that they're going to search, right? And Google doesn't have a lot of capability to increase that inventory. So in order for them to make more money, they need to more aggressively monetize that inventory. Like get people to pay more for low quality inventory that they weren't bidding on, increasing the costs of the bids for the competitive inventory that exists. Getting agencies out of the equation so that 10 or so percent can go into the bids on search. And Facebook, they have much more control over their inventory. They can get people to scroll more and spend more time on the apps, giving, essentially more mileage to serve ads against, right? So Facebook has much more capacity to control their inventory than Google does. And so I think that's one of the reasons why the relationships are kind of different. And I also think that's one of the big reasons why Google is leaning hard into their own properties, with things like demand gen that's coming out, right? So,
yeah, interesting mechanics you bring up there. And I remember back, like, we saw kind of I don't know if it was similar in the US and North America, but we had kind of like a CPC recession during the pandemic, at least the first half of it, let's say. And my hypothesis about what was going on there is that just there was so much more search volume and it was quite natural. People were searching online. This increased the amount of inventory and it caused a reduction in unit price. If that inventory would be more constrained, if there'd be less inventory and all this ad dollars competing for it, then the unit cost would go up. But you're right. Google, this is a bit like the weather for them. They can try to identify commercial queries better and make sure that ads are being served. There are things that they can do for sure, but ultimately it is a bit like the weather for them, that search volume. And then this causes them, I mean, this used to be called surfaces, and I don't know if they really replaced that term. I think they're not really using the term surfaces anymore, but they look at more like where else can they create space. And some of it is like organic, some of it or there are free clicks, and some of it is monetized. But you just said the word demand gen. So, and we were just talking about these new automated campaign types. So, like, what can you tell us about demand gen?
well, it's kind of like Discover on steroids, right?
Well, Cyrus,
And
what's Discover then for somebody? I mean, just not we don't have to get too much into it, but quickly, what's Discover and what's demand gen?
so Discover ads, discovery ads, essentially serving across specific Google properties. So, they're in Gmail, right? They're in like their Discover app, YouTube, some placements, right? Not video placements. This is home search and like watch next, things like that. And it's kind of like middle of the funnel ads. So they're visual images, product feeds, things like that, serving on some of these Google properties. And in between kind of the again, top of the funnel, YouTube, like traditional, what I consider traditional YouTube, display definitely, and then obviously search towards the bottom of the funnel. So it's the closest Google's really gotten to date before demand gen, right? In terms of like having a sort of Facebook
Mm.
analog.
So,
And yeah.
and I interrupted you earlier. So you said that demand gen is then like Discover on steroids. So we just covered Discover. So take us then further into demand gen.
Yeah, so demand gen's just adding more. really, I guess, like what you could call like the rest of Google's owned properties that aren't search, right? So it's YouTube, it's Shorts, it's in-stream. You're getting video access. They're adding, additional audience types, right? Literally like lookalikes. Like
Yeah.
who's heard of those from the social side of things?
Yeah.
So you just, I guess, like expanding it out to the whole network of owned properties that aren't search. Yeah.
Yeah. And so that's an interesting placement category there. Google owned and operated. And like that was a big part of what Performance Max was, or what Performance Max is, was just taking these shopping campaigns, making sure that, I mean, yeah, there's also a display component, but also making sure that they're going to be putting those ad dollars toward Google owned and operated properties. And demand gen is kind of like just plucking out that geo and Google owned and operated segment and really addressing that. I mean, you before mentioned a couple times like this is the closest that they've had, or most comparable they've had to paid social. They're taking terms like lookalike audiences, and it seems like they're trying to take some of the propositions of paid social and speak to those. How credible do you find a comparison between demand gen and, say, a Meta campaign?
So I think it's higher up the funnel for sure, but I think the comparison is somewhat valid for sure. I also think that, like, Google would love to get their hands on a social media company like Snap, Pinterest. Like, if it weren't for antitrust scrutiny, they would like love to add that the overall portfolio. But I think it's like pretty close, right? It's not, if I were to kind of like compare it specifically to something on Facebook, right? It would be maybe not like a purchase optimization, but maybe like an add to cart optimization, because Facebook has different events that you can optimize for, right? Really will put you in different spots of the funnel. Like Facebook knows if you're a buyer like really well. And so I don't think demand gen is going to have that level of down the funnel capacity to drive purchases at the efficiency that Facebook does. But I think, pretty comparable. And, I think it'll also be able to leverage the assets that people are already using on social, which is going to make like pretty easy uptake. And that's, I think, always been one of the challenges, is that all of these advertisers who are Facebook first, they're like, oh, great, let's add Google to the mix. And they're like, oh, wait, we can't, like, none of this is relevant. None of this is useful. Or we got to like completely start from scratch. And has always been a little, well, and I think this is going to help kind of lower the barrier to entry pretty significantly.
Mhm. Yeah, I agree with that. And I think that, they're leaning pretty hard on YouTube here, and that's probably the closest thing that they've got to like a proper social platform. I guess a couple questions I have, like, I'm wondering, like, the headspace that people are in when they're on YouTube compared to the headspace that they're in when they're browsing like a content feed on Facebook or Instagram. I feel like in that sense, YouTube is maybe pretty close, but like the Gmail part sticks out like a sore thumb. Like that's just in there, in my opinion. It doesn't really fit to demand gen, I would say. But I mean, yeah, I would see that as a better place to serve some remarketing inventory or something like that. And this makes me wonder too, like demand gen, you really the idea implicit in that name is that you're going to be waking up cold traffic and waking up demand and awareness in people who didn't have that before, or somewhere a little below an awareness campaign, let's say. But and I'm wondering, I just feel like Google's algorithms, and it probably has to do with their audience graph and some of the technologies they've built, but they're really good at the warm traffic and at that demand capture. And I'm wondering how well they'll perform here and actually bringing us some more kind of cold traffic.
Yeah, I mean, it's an open question, right? Facebook has been amazing at it, but it's also been their entire business, and Google for the majority of its existence and the majority of its revenue, right, is demand capture. So it's a completely different animal, and I guess we'll see, right? Yeah, I think they do well with some stuff so far, but yeah, we'll definitely we'll see how it goes.
I love how transparently the campaign type is named just demand gen. Like
Yeah,
it's so it's not branded whatsoever. It's just it would be it's like if they would call PMax like, I don't know, Capture Max or something like
placement soup.
replacement soup. Yeah. Yeah, then hey, you know what? We're closer to fall than we are to summer at this point. I'm looking forward to some warm placements too. Yeah, but so we mentioned that YouTube is a core component of these demand gen campaigns, and YouTube Shorts in particular. That's one of like the big iterations here compared to Discover campaigns. Is that it's going to have the short inventory in there. What do you think about YouTube Shorts so far? And like, have you what's working, what's not? Do you have a lot of experience with it?
I have a decent amount of experience. We run YouTube Shorts for most clients that are also running on social, and I honestly find it to be pretty strong. It definitely punches above its weight. I mean, the great thing about Shorts is that you can essentially take assets that work well on Facebook, vertical video, very native feeling, kind of like TikTok text overlays, all of that, UGC content that you see people posting about on Twitter, right? You can take that, drop it right into Shorts, and it's gonna perform pretty well, and sometimes like very well. So it's something that we've found as well is that while the direct attribution is maybe not amazing, like it could be pretty good, the post purchase, and I always cite post purchase data with like a gigantic grain of salt because I don't even remember what I had for lunch yesterday. So, are people really going to know where they originally saw this product? But it gets a lot of credit for purchase in the post purchase surveys. So, I'm just have a specific client I'm thinking about where 1.5% of the spend is going to shorts. I mean, they're spending a lot of money, so it's not an insignificant amount of money. And 4.9% of the post purchase attribution is going to shorts. Now, again, I don't believe that that is the actual number. I mean, the direct attribution is significantly lower than that, but still, like, we're happy with it, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's generally a great placement. I mean, it's a lot of inventory. It just matches how people are interacting, right? Like I sit on TikTok a lot, like Instagram Reels, like it's kind of I feel like the way that media consumption is going, and YouTube's the biggest media platform there is. I like shorts. I recommend it to every, you know, paid social client as like something to test, like throw some budget in there, see how it does. And yeah, I'm excited about it in demand gen too.
Yeah, I'm quite curious about it, and I mean, I think the interesting thing about this short form video is like. So, by the way, I'm an old man. I'm not on TikTok. I also don't. I haven't really checked out YouTube Shorts that much myself. So my exposure here is like to Reels on Instagram, and but what I find about my behavior there, like if you think about like a view rate, I either have like a 2% view rate or like 1,000% view rate because I ended up rewatching the thing like 10 times because they're so short. And yeah, and if they're really good, then they're really good. So I think it's a interesting form of engagement. And I think what sounds cool in the demand gen context, they're going to have these brand lift studies, which we know from YouTube, and say what you will about them. I'm actually kind of more interested in the search lift studies because you'll hear that like from folks who are advertising on both Meta and Google. It's like if you that if there's a reduction in their spend on Meta or they're turning off Meta or something, that then they see their search volume on Google can drop as well. And so I'm wondering, what kind of effects there. I do I really believe in search lift as a phenomenon, and I'm curious what the studies will show.
I'm excited about that because I've seen this so many times with paid social, right? And it's like it's one of the ways that we can also I mean, we can't like directly track it, but it's one of the things that we also look at, when we're working with clients, is like to get a more complete picture of performance,
Yeah.
right? And I think, TikTok in particular, we see this a lot where like the direct attribution on TikTok will be terrible, but we start running ads on TikTok and Amazon sales will surge
Yeah.
in relation to the TikTok. Yeah, I think it'll be really exciting to see what
Yeah.
it is, because I definitely believe the phenomenon is there as well.
Yeah. And I mean, that's the premise of demand gen, like that you can generate the demand over here and then go ahead and capture it through the search channels over there. And yeah, I don't know what I want to say. I don't let's see how it's going to work out though. Oh yeah, because I remember what I was saying. That's sort of the promise of PMAX already, is that these properties are in there and that Google's going to like kind of magically serve the right ad at the right moment to the right user and so on, and create something more than the sum of those placements. But I kind of don't believe that that's actually what happens in PMAX. I feel
Yeah.
like they just go shopping, and if there's extra budget, then they throw some display in or something. I don't really feel like it's this synergetic, magical formula. And I think demand gen plus PMAX or demand gen plus any kind of search or shopping could work pretty well.
Yeah, I feel like my feelings on Max are pretty well known. The like Google people are in my DMs all the time, like trying to tell me I'm wrong. But I generally view PMAX as like remnant inventory, like sales. Like that's
Mm.
what it. Yeah, and so I think I'm much more optimistic about demand gen than PMAX. So
I would say it has a very positive buzz at the moment. So before I'm just looking at the clock here, I've got you a bit longer. I want to ask you just we were talking about paid social. You are managing Meta ad spend in addition to Google, and I'm just wondering, how is the situation different than like 18 months ago? Because I hear things are improving, signs are positive. Is that what you're seeing too?
yeah, it feels like a lot. It feels like a much better platform, and you know, Tim Cook definitely like took Apple out there, took Meta out to the woodshed with iOS 14, which is
Yeah,
now two,
that's
or is it 2 or 3? I don't know,
and
2 or 3 years old at this point.
that's a
Uh,
while ago now. That's a while ago.
yeah, but it took Meta a long time to get their attribution back in platform, and like it's still like a buggy platform and there's stuff in there, but I think it's in a much better place now. Advantage Plus, the new campaign type that has rolled out over the last year or so, tends to work really well. I mean, I'm incredibly bullish on Meta. I've invested a lot of money in Meta stock over the last year or so, which has turned out to be a great decision, but I think it's in a much better place.
Yeah.
I think advertisers are in a better place on Meta too. I think advertisers are just getting better about knowing what works and what doesn't. But I also think the advertising ecosystem is getting better in the sense that a lot of the wasteful players are leaving. And what I mean by that is all of these VC-backed brands who could acquisition costs like well above the lifetime value, just like burning money to
Mm,
acquire customers.
mm,
That's pretty much worked its way out of the system at this point, right?
yeah.
We've seen it with like Allbirds and all of these other, publicly traded, VC-backed like e-commerce companies essentially. Yeah, so I think brands like Allbirds and other, big VC-backed companies that could overspend on acquisition well beyond what they would be able to get back, like a lot of that money has made its way through the system. And it was a lot of money when you like add it all up. So I just think it's not only is the platform better in terms of like ASC, Advantage Plus, getting their attribution data back mostly through modeling, right? But it was a big problem for them, and I'm sure they invested billions to make it work. And then just lots of free money that has worked its way out of the system. So I actually think it's in a great spot. I'm generally very happy with it, except for their, you know, flaky moderation decisions and how stuff gets disapproved by machines. But
Well, I mean, the disapprovals on Google are out of control as well. So let's face it.
Yeah.
But so I've got one remark and one question. Yeah, you mentioned the VC burning through, and I think that's true. I guess then what my eye is on now is that there's this wave of Chinese money coming in, and the situation might be a bit different than in the US than here in Europe. But they're rather than selling through retailers or then selling directly through Amazon now, a lot of or there are some players stepping up out of China and Southeast Asia who are just trying to just sell directly to the consumers, and they're spending money like crazy. I mean, Temu comes to mind, but there's also Shopee has made some plays in this area. There's one, I don't know if you see these guys in the US at all, but we're seeing them a lot here in Europe, Light in the Box. They're out of Singapore, and they're just throwing money at the wall. So it seems like there's always got to be some big shot walking around spending way beyond any kind of realistic customer acquisition payback window. But yeah,
It's definitely I'm sure it's a cycle that will always repeat itself. It feels less on Facebook now, so we'll enjoy those waters while we have them,
yep.
before we go back into the crazy upcycle again.
And one more thing. So, you were just talking about how Facebook has recovered a lot of their attribution through modeling, and you're talking about advantage shopping campaigns in a pretty positive sense. And this is like I feel like I often hear it this way, or people seem to have a lot of love or willingness to accept something like Advantage Plus and accepting the modeled attribution and stuff like that. And then if it would be Google, on the other hand, like their equivalent is Performance Max. And they're also working on model conversions. And we're going to hear a lot more of that after they sunset cookies next year. And I'm just wondering why. What's the difference? Why are people hard on Google on some of these topics and not so hard on Meta? Is the product just structured better? Is it just about the performance? What is it?
That is a great question, and it's one that I've thought about too, because I used to be like I've done a full 180. I used to be like very like pro Google and like pro Google in a like I think they're operating ethically and like Facebook are like the unethical actors. And I've done a complete 180 on that. I think some of it is probably that, you know, Facebook has always been like a different animal, right? Like you're not targeting like specific queries, you're targeting people and demographics, right? And I think from an advertising standpoint, they haven't really taken too much away. And also there's the fact that it's an owned platform or owned platforms, right? Like Audience Network, which is like display, right? It's like Facebook's display. It's like a very, very small percentage of their whole platform. And everything else is owned inventory for them. And then like Google has over the years, and some of it's, I'm sure, like PR, right? Like they've continued to go out of their way to take things away. And the way they've taken them away has been poorly communicated or like outright, BS. Like the whole like search query report thing, like that they're like, oh yeah, we did it for privacy, but like you still have like single impression, zero click, like queries showing up in there all the time. And then you've got tons of stuff with conversions that just isn't there. We've also seen that like the cost per click escalation and hidden queries has gone up faster than like visible queries, right? So, I think it's been a trend of behavior on Google's part where I'm like, oh, I don't trust you guys. And yeah, I don't like because you're right. If well, PMax was kind of like that, but you're like, I would definitely not, I trust Meta more than Google in terms of like their sort of benevolence towards advertisers on the platform.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm just curious because it's pretty common thing that I observe, and I think too with Advantage Plus. I mean, I think big beef that people have with Performance Max these topics like brand versus non-brand, which is starting to get under control, like what is remarketing and what is actually acquisition, kind of cold acquisition. This is a kind of open question, and I think you've got more control in Meta over that. So that's one thing. And just as you said, Google has they've really changed the identity of the platform, and like things that were so core to their value proposition at the start are things that they've taken away or reduced, and so it's probably just had some reputational damage.
Right. And I love you mentioned the brand non-brand because I love the Ben and Kirk argument on brand non-brand, and I like having it in PMax. But like that's one of the things where like the data you can see, you're like, well, why should we trust you, right? Because my experience with Performance Max, when you leave brand in Performance Max, is that it'll use that to like hit a target that you probably didn't set aggressively enough, and then waste budget on like remnant display inventory to bring you down to your target. And so, all of your conversions are essentially being driven by brand, which is a small percentage of the overall spend. And the rest of the spend is essentially just lighting money on fire on low quality inventory. And like, we can see that, right? Like not as clearly as we should because they're like, here are these like, query groupings, right? But like you can still see that. And so, like I'm sure there's probably it's like you had visibility and now you don't, and the stuff that you can see doesn't look good. Whereas on Facebook, it's just always been, different.
Well, I think we're just about the end of our time box here. So before I let you go, I mean, is there anything that I didn't ask you that I should have? Are there any trends you're watching or anything that you feel is hyped, underhyped?
So this is, I guess, like mostly U.S. specific, but and I don't know how much you follow U.S. politics. The less you follow U.S. politics, the better your mental health. So the essentially there's like no student loan repayments, and those are restarting in October. So there's a huge swath of people who are going to have to start paying money back against loans, and it's estimated to be between like 70 and 200 billion dollars, of which has mostly been discretionary income for kind of like the core demo, right? Younger adults, and just losing lots of money. So that's something I'm watching to see how that'll impact spending on e-commerce, right? Particularly as it like happens right before the holiday season.
Yeah.
It's kind of just like one thing I'm looking at. And then you're hyped, overhyped, underhyped. I'm gonna say that is generative AI. It is both over and underhyped. Just gonna drop that there. I think everyone's like, oh, it's gonna change the world right now, and it's gonna replace all of us. For bow before our AI overlords. I think we're a little ways away from that, but the potential applications are definitely massive and probably larger than most of us even realize.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to describe it. There's that like, oh, I can't quote this as exactly as I should, but there's that Bill Gates quote where like we kind of overestimate the amount of change that's going to happen in the next 3 years, and we underestimate the amount of change that's going to happen in the next 10 years, and it's probably something like that.
Yep.
Thanks for mentioning that about the student loans repayment. I think that's huge, and I won't comment on it too much more because I have a terrible habit of ending episodes on a super low note, and I'm not going to do that. But I think unfortunately that is I don't have a nice way to phrase it. That's something to definitely keep an eye on. It's not good timing at all. But
No.
to put it as short as I can. So thanks again for sharing all these ideas and experiences with us. Any shout outs, or where can we find you online?
Well, appreciate you having me, Mike. This was a lot of fun. You can find me on Twitter at CJ Slattery, and you can just look me up on LinkedIn as well, Collin Slattery. Lots of hot takes to be found. I do make it into the take of the week competition on a fellow podcast pretty frequently. So if you want some marketing hot takes, fun, I promise you it won't be a boring follow.
Yeah, that's Marketing O'Clock. So definitely check out the Marketing O'Clock, great podcast. I might have gotten a hot take on there once or twice too, but I love that podcast. It's always a lot of fun. Yeah, so that was Collin Slattery. Thanks again for joining us, Collin.
Thanks for having me, Mike.
Thanks for listening to Growing E-commerce. And if you enjoyed this podcast, please consider sharing it with coworkers, friends, or within your professional network. We really appreciate it. This podcast is produced by Smarter E-commerce, also known as SMEC. To learn more, visit smarter-ecommerce.com.